Okay, YouTube is now going to. Hey YouTube, hey Facebook, hope you're doing very, very well. This is another episode of Tuesday Talks with Azren, episode number 5. If you haven't seen these before, this is a very straightforward segment. Basically, this is where you guys vote on different language learning topics that you'd like to see me talk about and give my advice on, and then I make a video to give my advice. This is basically something that started off in a Facebook group that I run called the Language Learning Nerds. And so if you're not a part of that Facebook group, if you're watching this on YouTube and you're not a part of that group, I highly recommend you guys go join it. Go on Facebook and simply search the Language Learning Nerds, and feel free to join us in there. The group has been growing steadily and rapidly, and now we're at, I think as I'm recording this, something like 30,000 different people in the group. It's like, whoa, super duper flattering. So thank you everybody for being a part of the group. Now let's dive into our main topics of today, which are pronunciation, improving pronunciation. And also another highly voted topic was also, I'll pull it up right here, was also listening comprehension. We're going to start with pronunciation, and then we're going to go to listening comprehension second, especially because I think last week or perhaps 2 weeks ago, listening comprehension was the primary topic of the video. So if you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook, just literally go back to the previous Tuesday Talks with Azren, and you can watch that one. I had a whole video strictly on listening comprehension. I believe it was the last week's video. Maybe it was 2 weeks ago, but I'm pretty sure it was last week. Quick little update for the Facebook people. One thing we're going to do to make these Tuesday Talks a little bit easier to find is we're going to put tags on them for Tuesday Talks with Azren. That way you can just click the tag and you can go see them all. Right now they're not tagged like that, and so we're going to start using some tags a little bit better than we have been before. Yeah. Anything else I have for the group before I jump into the topic today? I don't think so. Let's jump into our topics. So, pronunciation. The number one thing that's helped me personally with pronunciation is having a little bit of an understanding of phonetics. So phonetics, if you don't know what it is the linguistic study of pronunciation. It's a whole branch of linguistics. People do master's degrees and PhDs in this branch of linguistics. And I have found that having a little bit of a basis in phonetics and understanding a little bit about phonetics and understanding something about it, studying it a little bit, helps so much for pronunciation. So what I literally do is go into YouTube, and I need you to spend like 2 hours, 3 hours watching videos about phonetics. Watch some university lectures. You can find some 1-hour lectures on YouTube. I'm sure you can. Or Google it, read some blog posts, read some articles. Start to familiarize yourself with phonetics. You need to get an intro to phonetics. While you are getting an intro to phonetics, I would recommend that you get an introduction to and you start to learn about what is called the IPA. I'm going to write it here for everybody in the chat. I'll start with YouTube. IPA. It stands for the International Phonetic Alphabet. There we go. I typed it into the YouTube chat. Let me type it on Facebook as well. The International Phonetic Alphabet. You learn about the International Phonetic Alphabet. There we go. I typed in the chat for Facebook as well, the International Phonetic Alphabet. This will help you a lot too. Basically what it is where you have, how do I explain this? The International Phonetic Alphabet is an alphabet that describes sounds with a very, there's a very specific letter for every sound. So for instance, if we take something like in English, we have the sound ah. When we have the sound ah, we represent ah with an A, right? Like and even it's not sometimes it's actually ah. We have different versions of it, but regardless, we have this letter A, which has ah, right? I would assume. Spanish says ah as well, but in Gujarati, there's a different letter for the sound ah. It's a completely different letter, right? It's a different letter when you write it to say ah. We don't use an A, we use a different letter altogether. The International Phonetic Alphabet standardizes pronunciation. So no matter what language you're learning, whether it's Gujarati, Hindi, Japanese, right? If there's a sound, there's a specific letter for that sound. And what also goes behind that letter as well is there's going to be, when you look at the phonetic alphabet, there's going to be very particular linguistic descriptions of that letter. So I'll give you an example. If we look at, for example, the letter S, right? There's a letter in the International Phonetic Alphabet, and there's a description for it. That would be a devoiced, I'm a little rusty, alveolar, I suppose, devoiced alveolar fricative. Yes, a devoiced alveolar fricative. That's the name of, that's how you describe that sound. So if you learn the International Phonetic Alphabet and you learn all of the different, or the major describing terminology for different sounds for each different letter in the language that you're learning, what happens is that when you hear a sound, you're not trusting your ear to hear it and you're trying to figure out what to do with your mouth to reproduce it. That's not what you're doing. Instead, you say, okay, let me figure out how do you describe that sound phonetically? And then you then know what to do with your mouth, because the phonetics of it is going to explain very clearly what to do in your mouth. When you know what a devoiced alveolar fricative means, when you know what that means in your head, you know what to do with your tongue. I've got a student right now, a French student. She used to work in speech language, what is it called? Speech language pathology, is that what it is? Speech language pathology? Yes. Sorry, so speech pathologist. She's a speech pathologist. That's what it was. And so she is reasonably familiar with the International Phonetic Alphabet, some phonetic terminology. And when she struggles with French pronunciation, I'll literally tell her, hey, it's a voiced uvular fricative. And she'll be like, oh, and she can just do it. Just by me saying that, there's no more struggling of, wait, what do I do? How do I make that sound? And someone saying, well, you got to take like your tongue and put it in the back of your mouth, and you got to kind of make it vibrate. And you're like, huh? But if you just know voiced uvular fricative, you're like, oh, okay, voiced uvular fricative. Okay. So if you really understand, someone just tell you, and you can instantly start to do it because your tongue knows what to do. You know what that means. It's a very particular way to describe the sound. Someone tells me, Azren, do an interdental voiced stop. I'll be like, the. And you're like, great, that's how you pronounce this letter in this language. Oh, okay, fantastic. It takes a fair number of hours to learn it, and it's really hard. This is not a quick magic bullet, quick fix. It definitely is not. But if you go learn some basic phonetics, learn your International Phonetic Alphabet for the language you're learning, because I don't even know it perfectly. No one knows it. Well, I don't know it perfectly. There's different sounds that in languages I don't speak, and I don't know how to write those sounds, right? Even in Gujarati, I don't know how to write all the things. I don't know how to write tone markers in Mandarin but that's okay. I'm reasonably familiar. And then learn how to describe each of those letters. Learn what a fricative is. What is an affricate? What is a stop? What does it mean if something is voiced? What does it mean if something is devoiced? Learn the parts of the mouth. You have uvular sounds, guttural sounds. You have guttural? Yes, guttural. You have alveolar sounds, you have interdental sounds, you have affricates, you have palatal sounds, you have glides, you have there's all these different terms, right? Phonetics terms that are really useful to know. And that is it's a really hard thing it's a really time-consuming thing to learn, but it is honestly, no matter what language you're learning, that is one of the most foolproof things. I spent 9 minutes on this. One of the most foolproof things you can do that will help you improve your pronunciation if you dedicate the number of hours required to go figure that out. So I would highly recommend that. On the pronunciation side as well, I'll give a couple other smaller techniques that are maybe less time consuming that will have less results, but you're welcome to give it a try. Shadowing is a great technique. Shadowing, literally Google shadowing language learning for a detailed description. But basically, it's where you're copying along, repeating along what someone is saying with another native speaker, and you're trying to match their intonation, you're trying to match their pronunciation. That's a thing you can do. Google it for a more detailed description, because there's a lot of nice 7, 8, 9, 10, 20-minute videos that really go into it. Shadowing is a great technique. I'd also recommend if you got a little bit of money to spend, or maybe save up some money, actually hiring someone who has a background in accent reduction or in pronunciation, and hiring them to work with you to improve your pronunciation. That's a really, really big piece of advice I can give you that will help a lot. For pronunciation, the one thing that's really important to understand is that, see, pronunciation is very different than grammar. Basically, most other elements of language learning. Pronunciation is so different than most other elements of language learning. And it's different in the sense that most, if not all, other elements of language learning, if you study it for a week or two, you're going to have a pretty good handle on how it works. So if I go study the present tense in, I don't know, in French tomorrow, it's going to be hard and it'll take me a long time to master it. But within a couple of weeks of studying it, I should have a good some grasp of it in my mind. Same for vocabulary. If you study vocabulary, yes, it takes a long time to learn it and really have it sink into your mind. But within a couple of weeks, you can start to really notice some differences, and you can start to get an okay grasp on new vocabulary and actually remember. So it's like within a few weeks, you can start to see some results. But the problem or the challenge with pronunciation is that it's a much slower process to figure out. Pronunciation takes takes more time to figure out. It's not something that after 2 weeks of study, you've really started to get the hang of it. That's not how it works. Pronunciation is something that, generally speaking, takes a lot longer. It might take you months to make some incremental improvements. Like, it took me, I would say, 3 months, maybe 2 months of work, 2 months of consistent practice. And I was immersed in French at the time. I was in France. 2 months before I finally could say the letter R, say my R's. And even after that 2 months, it wasn't like I could say them perfectly. I was like acceptable, but I would still struggle. It took me years to be able to go in Spanish, to really be able to roll my R's and hit all the R's properly. Sometimes I'd overroll them. Sometimes the roll wouldn't happen. I couldn't say it right. Years of like slowly, not consistent, like every day practicing for an hour. But every time I spoke Spanish, I'd always kind of focus on the R's, right? Years of kind of always having it in the back of my mind of I'm going to try and work on the R's when I speak and try and pronounce them. Years. It's not something you can go cram. In my experience, it's not something you can go cram in 3 weeks, 3 months. You can't just go cram and learn it. While vocabulary, grammar, other things, for it to really stick in your mind, you can't cram. But when you cram for other things in language learning, you can really start to see some results. And in pronunciation, generally that's not the case. Generally, it's not the case at all, right? It's just not. So that's the most important thing, I think, when we look at pronunciation. You have to go in with the right mindset. You have to go with the right mindset. Okay, let's transition topics to listening comprehension. I literally just a week ago made a whole video strictly on this topic. So I'm not going to spend as much time on it today, but I'll give a couple of things. So listening comprehension, I think the first thing is you have to practice listening comprehension with things that are at your level and gradually try to increase the difficulty. That's super important. Most of the time, when people say they struggle with listening comprehension, let's say often, not most of the time, often when people say they struggle with listening comprehension, they think they're struggling because they tried to go listen to some TV show or YouTube video that are meant for native speakers, and they don't understand. And then 6 months later, they try and watch videos on YouTube again, they still don't understand. And they think to themselves, I suck at listening comprehension. No, you don't. You're trying to listen to content that is meant for super, super, super advanced people in the language. And you're still only an upper beginner. It's going to be years before you can properly understand a YouTube video. Check this out. I was watching I speak Spanish super well. Como si hablo español. Hablo muy bien. Como llevo, no sé, 12 años, más o menos, 11 o 12 años que aprendo español, que lo hablo. Yo me especialicé en francés y español cuando era estudiante en la universidad. Como enseño español, como entiendo casi todo cuando cuando hablo con la gente, I speak it super well, Spanish, right? And yet, 2 weeks ago, I was watching a series on Netflix, and I probably didn't, like, there were certain parts where I was like, what did he just say? Pause, rewind, re-listen. If I didn't have the subtitles, I might not have fully understood it. I was like, wait, what was that? What? So I've been learning for 12 years, and I speak Spanish at a very, very advanced level. And yet, when I was watching a Netflix show, there were certain parts where I was like, well, I don't know what that was. And it's because they're talking about certain subject matters I hadn't gotten a lot of experience with. So that's always a part of the process. So a lot of people think they're bad at listening comprehension, but they're actually not that bad at listening comprehension. They're not that bad at it, actually. It's that their expectations are so out of whack that they think they're bad at listening comprehension. You might be just fine at listening comprehension. You might be just fine, and nothing's wrong with your listening comprehension. You're just fine at it, but you think you suck. You think you're bad because you're expecting yourself to be able to go watch something on Netflix or listen to music, watch TV, and understand it, right? So get your expectations in line. Get them in check. Check your expectations. Now, when it comes to listening comprehension, what I would recommend to actually start improving it is, as I said, listen to things at your level, gradually increase the difficulty over a series of months and years. If you're in it for the long term, months and years, gradually increase the difficulty, and that will help you tremendously. A lot of people, this will tie into pronunciation. A lot of people struggle with listening comprehension because they lack. How do I say this? They lack. They're not. This is so hard to explain, but I'll try my best. They're not used to. They're not people that actively listen. You're just kind of like, how do I say this? You're not detailed enough in your listening. Let me give you a different example. Myself, when it comes to seeing, when my eyes, I can see. I have eyes. I see stuff. I see the computer. I see stuff. But if I walk into a room, and then I just walk in, I'm just going about my day as usual, and I leave the room, and you ask me 30 seconds later, hey, Azren, list everything that's in that room, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I'd be like, I don't know, I have no idea. I'm the kind of guy who, if I walk into the kitchen, there can be a big watermelon sitting on the table, and then if you ask me, hey, Azren, was there a watermelon on the table? I'd be like, no. Well, I don't know. I didn't see one. I only see what I was looking for. Versus other people, they naturally actually pay more attention with their eyes, and they see stuff because they're actually actively looking at stuff all the time. They're like, oh, look at that bird. Oh, nice birdie. Oh, look, the neighbor's doing that. What's the neighbor doing? Oh, they bought a new lawnmower. Oh, that's cool. Oh, look at that on the house. That wasn't there yesterday. Oh, and they're actively always kind of looking at stuff. Like, not like in the back, like they're doing it naturally, and that's just how they're wired. That's just how they are. And when it comes to listening, we also have two types of people. We have people like myself. I'm always listening to stuff, and I listen kind of attentively. And I'm like, oh, interesting. That person pronounced that word like that. Or even not language related, I might be like, oh, I just heard that song 2 days ago. They must be playing that song more frequently on the radio now. I listen reasonably actively. But there's other people that don't listen actively. That's not their default measure. They listen very passively. They listen the same way I don't watch things very actively, and I'm not looking actively unless I really think about it. Other people, unless they really think about it, they're not listening actively to stuff around them. They're just not, right? So if you struggle listening comprehension, you might be that type of person that even outside of language learning, you're not the type of person that is actively using their ears throughout the day. So when you're listening, you might need to, throughout your day, you might need to actively pay attention to stuff that you hear, right? You might just think, what am I hearing right now? Oh, I hear some cars. Oh, interesting. Oh, that was an interesting song. Oh, that, like, and actively use your ears. You might have to do that. That might be something that is a good idea for you. So anyway, as I said, I made a video last week that I gave a lot of different advice on listening comprehension. So I'm gonna, if you want more details on that, maybe go watch that previous video because I went way more in depth. But for today, we'll wrap this video up here. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it, and we'll chat later. Facebook, we'll say goodbye to you first. See you later. Goodbye, Facebook. And now let's say goodbye to YouTube. Hit the like button if you like the video. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.